Okay, here's my real question.
All right.
Who are these for? Who, like, you just said that white evangelical Christians are making it for other white evangelical Christians, but why do they need it? Like, what's the point of me watching a bunch of kids form a prayer circle when I just did that last week?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Right.
I don't, like, why?
Yeah, and I don't, and this is the thing, it's like, I do think that's who it's for. It's targeted, right?
Right.
Because like you said, kind of the writers of these things are in the same demographic.
Right.
And so I think they are intentionally writing it to the specific, creating movies for the specific demographic. But like, I understand why this demographic wants Christian movies or movies that.
What is that?
Well, I think it's most of us have these preferences of things we would like to, whether it's to listen to. I mean, same thing in music.
Okay.
You know, like if you turn on just kind of the pop Christian music, it's the same thing. It's geared toward a very specific demographic.
I think where I would disagree with you on that.
Okay.
I don't disagree with you on that.
Okay.
But I think the part that doesn't make sense to me is that if you make a movie with weird characters in it, you're not just making it for people who are like those weird characters. You're making it so that the whole world potentially can see your demographic represented in it. Yeah. And I think the problem with Christian movies is that they're so inaccessible to anybody else that nobody else is watching it.
Gotcha.
So
because it's not relatable.
Because it's not relatable or has anything to do with anybody else except this group of people.
Yeah. And
so if you're only doing it for that reason, it doesn't seem like there's a point of doing it.
Well, but I think the point is to give that subsection of people something that they actually like, enjoy watching.
Okay.
And so I think it's for their entertainment purposes. I mean, that's what movies are, right?
Right.
So I don't think it's this, you know, so for example, in like certain Christian movies, like the movie Courageous, for example, right, is really like a charge to men to be the spiritual leaders of their homes. Okay. And so, and to kind of like for men to kind of awaken and become involved in, you know, like in following Jesus and being involved in the church and being spiritual leaders in their homes. And so again, that's not written to a group that's outside of that Christian world, because that message wouldn't resonate with anyone really outside of that group.
Right.
But I can honestly say for me, while watching the movie, I mean, I'm inspired by it.
Okay.
Yeah. And you could go, hey, that's a cheesy movie or whatever. But like, you know, I mean, in it, I mean, I think that's where like made by the same people who did Facing the Giants. And that's what I'm saying. Like they progressively got better. Like this movie is a much better story. The daughter dies in it. Spoiler alert. And you have to see them dealing with the realities of grieving the loss of a child and what that entails and looks like, and the strain that it puts on a marriage and the strain it puts on a father dealing with his other child, and all of those things as a parent is highly relatable. And so for me, like watching that movie, I'm like, this is like, I get this, like this connects with me. And so I do think there's a place for that, because it's speaking a message to those people. But I think what you're talking about is a fair evaluation of a lot of the Christian movies, that they're not made for those outside of the Christian circle.
No.
And I agree with that. Like if you're watching it from the outside, it's going to be hard to connect with the message of it, even, you know. Now, like one of their other movies, Fireproof, and it's dealing like with a marriage that's on the brink, that might be a little bit more relatable.
And there's fires.
and there's fires.
Yeah.
And
there's something other than, you know, the devil to fight.
Right. Well, true. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, so I do think there's some nuance in the movies. And again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that these movies are all the best, like high quality movies made. Right. But they I do think that that their message is, and I get it, their message is more entailed or directed toward those that are within that are in Christianity. And so, and I think that's okay to have movies directed toward them. And I think it's also okay to have movies that would reach a broader audience. So I don't think it has to be an either or.
Okay.
But you're saying you would just personally like to see movies made that reaches beyond just a more specific demographic of people.
I'm saying they don't always why do they always have to deal with church?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, why can't God be like, what's the other movie? Hacksaw Ridge.
Okay.
Like, that's an awesome war movie.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah. Very
and
good
the
movie.
dude likes God in it. And God sort of, I mean, he's not really a, whatever. He's in a cult or something.
Uh-huh.
But he likes God, and if that movie was made and he was an actual Christian, that would be a Christian movie, sort of.
Right.
But it's not really.
Okay.
So, like, why don't we tell that type of story? Like, I haven't seen Sound of Freedom, but the guy's a Christian. He's not a Christian either.
Well, yeah.
But the guy's a Christian in it, and he's doing a cool thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's a more accessible movie to other people than Christians than Courageous.
Right.
That can push the same types of message, but through a story. Instead of, we're all dads and life is hard, let's go pray about it.
Yeah. But I do think that's, but in and I see what you're saying, but I also think that's what I'm saying. Some, like, early on, the message of some of these movies are okay, and I'm okay with the fact that they're geared toward, like, as a person of faith, when I'm seeing loss played out in front of me on a screen, and the realities of grief and the realities of the pain of it, of, like, for example, in The Courageous, when he loses his daughter, like, when I'm watching, like, and how him wrestling with God is present in it, and he and his, the marriage being in stress over it, and like that's all that's real, and so as a Christian who's experienced loss, you might more easily connect with that. And I get it, if you're a non-Christian and you see that loss, it's going to be harder to connect with the way that they're approaching it, because they're talking, like they're wrestling with God, but they're in the church community and they're friends, and they're still praying, and all, like it can come across too Christian for a non-Christian, watching the movie. And so I do get that, but again, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it having to a story being presented to Christians. But at the same time, I'm with you. Like, I would like to see better stories written, higher budgeted movies that does appeal to a larger audience, that can tell a story without, the gospel having to even be explicitly just pushed down someone's throat. Right? Like, so for example, in the Bible, we have a story in the Bible. There's this book called Esther, and there's a whole storyline played out, and God's never mentioned in it. But if you're reading it and following along with it, it's not hard to see the fact that there's a sense of faith going on there, but it's not having to be so explicitly stated.
Right. That's the other thing. Like, Tolkien was a Christian.
Sure.
And he made Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
And there's a whole ton of Christian allegory stuff in that movie. Right. And Christians thought that was evil when it came out. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Or C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it goes back to the idea of fantasy.
Right.
Right. And like with C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, or Tolkien's, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, series, like when they're writing these, they're not even fully accepted in the larger Christendom world, not really during their time, but after their time, like looking back at it. And it's like, oh, that's fantasy. That's sci-fi. That's let's stay away from that stuff. And which I think is ridiculous and humorous, because I think God gave us imaginations,
Right.
And God gave us the ability to tell stories through allegory. And we see that in Scripture itself. I mean, Song of Solomon is a whole allegory, right?
And all the parables
And all the parables
that Jesus told.
exactly.
They weren't real stories.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that there is a place to be able to.
Nobody actually builds their house on sand. Dumb.
Dumb.
That was some magic sand.
Yeah, if it was standing up at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. But and so I see what you're saying, the fact that you can tell a story without having to be overt. And I don't mind there eventually being a part where Jesus or God is spoken of,
Right.
talked about, and related to. And even the gospel being shared, but in a creative way, not like someone's reading a script of, Romans Road of how to share the gospel, but just in a creative way through story. And I think we do need a greater sense of ownership of writing stories that can connect with people. Because I think most great stories all follow the arc of Scripture anyway.
Right.
And so there's a way to tell a story creatively that's really going to connect with most people, because most people are connecting with that arc anyways in movies, even movies that are non-Christian.